Hello and welcome to Generation 16, the series that showcases the history of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. There were over 24 shooters released on the Mega Drive in 1990, but nothing else like Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair, thanks to its mix of platforming and shooting. It's also unique within the Wonder Boy series itself. While it features the platforming element of the original game and the medieval setting of the sequel, the gameplay is completely original. Wonder Boy 3 hit arcades in 1988, and continued the trend of wild departure from one Wonder Boy installment to the next. Unlike its predecessors, it featured two-player simultaneous action where you could take on the role of either Leo or April and shoot your way through 15 levels. On the trip to the Mega Drive, Wonder Boy 3 remained mostly intact, keeping its core multiplayer action in almost all of its levels, but for some reason the graphics were almost entirely redrawn. Monster Lair is broken down into two different playstyles. The first of each set of levels feels very similar to the original Wonder Boy, where players run from left to right, hopping from platform to platform and avoiding or defeating enemies and obstacles. Like Wonder Boy, each player has a life bar that's constantly being whittled away over time. It's not there to tell you how many hits you can take, as touching an enemy even once results in a lost life. No, it's there to act as a timer, and as a reason for you and your companion to pick up weapon power-ups and fruit, which partially replenish that ever-depleting bar at the top of the screen. Unlike Wonder Boy, however, Leo and April don't toss hammers at their foes. They fire projectiles from their swords and are constantly given new weapon types throughout each level. These stages scroll automatically, though the player is able to speed things up a bit by running to the right of the screen. This can be dangerous though, as it's easy to come across an unexpected enemy without enough time to take evasive action. In two-player mode, it gets even more tricky as the leading player tends to cause the following player to slide a little bit, making the platforming really tricky when the screen speeds up unexpectedly. The second half of each level set is a more traditional side-scrolling shooter where Leo and April ride dragons and simply attack everything that appears on screen. The rules change a bit here, as our heroes can take more than one hit in these stages. Damage taken results in a reduced life bar, which is no longer counting down. Each of these stages ends in a boss fight against a usually large, usually pretty impressive looking bad guy. Once that's all over, you move on to the next theme stages and repeat. The port to the Mega Drive was done by Aicom Corporation, a development studio which appears to have been founded around 1988. It created a couple of arcade games for Sega early on, such as the futuristic combat racer AB Cop and the more serious motorcycle sim Racing Hero. Aicom is probably better known in the West for all of the NES games it developed. Titles like Robo Warrior, The Mayfac Conspiracy, Vice Project Doom, Amagon, and The Cryon Conquest, just to name a few. Aicom Corporation was eventually absorbed into Sammy, though the head of the company, Akio Inoue, seems to have started up a second development house with a similar name, Aicom Company Limited. SNK and Takara eventually bought a stake in this new company, and it was transformed into Yumekobo Company in 1992, creating Blazing Star for the Neo Geo, as well as porting other Neo Geo games to the PlayStation, Saturn, and Neo Geo Pocket. The original Wonder Boy arcade game was created by Westone Bit Entertainment, originally established as Escape in 1986 by former Aicom employees Iuchi Nishizawa and Michishito Ishizuka. They soon decided their original name sounded pretty negative, and so switched to Westone. The name was picked based on the first characters in each of the founders' names, Nishi, which means west, and Ishi, which means stone. The two of them were joined by graphic designer Hiromi Suzuko. Subsequent graphic designer Maki Ozora mused about her predecessor in an interview for The Untold History of Japanese Game Developers Volume 2 and the impact she had on Westone's games and company culture.
As you know, there was a woman among the founding members to begin with. There was always a designer who happened to be a woman, so it's actually a comfortable environment for me. I think the fact that the company's titles are known for bright colors may be attributed to some extent to the fact that there was always female designers, women designers. Maki Ozora.
Westone truly was a grassroots organization. The trio struck a deal with Aicom, which would change its name to Tecmo after a merger in 1987, to work out of their offices for free. Well, kind of for free. They were allowed to work out of Aicom's custodian's room for free, as long as they performed janitorial duties. Nishizawa slept there while Ishizuka and Suzuko commuted. The team quickly struck a deal with Sega and began to develop its first game, Wonder Boy, and would go on to create multiple follow-ups for the arcade and home console markets, as well as branch out into other genres. Westone would establish itself as a major development force in the industry, creating dozens of games for the arcade and just about every major hardware platform released up until it filed for bankruptcy in 2014. It even developed a few physical toys for Takara along the way. And, fun fact, Westone was also the actual developer behind NES Jaws. Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair is one of those rare Mega Drive games that was released originally in Japan and was then localized and released in the UK and Europe without making a stop in North America first. The only other game to do that in the system's history thus far was Twin Hawk, released in June of 1990. That's not to say that Americans didn't get to play Monster Lair on their home consoles, they just needed a TurboGrafx 16 system with the CD-ROM drive to do so. This is just one of the many bizarre instances of the Wonder Boy series being ported to non-Sega systems under multiple different names, usually by Hudson Soft, thanks to the unique business agreement between Westone and Sega on the original game. The original Wonder Boy was released to arcades in 1986. Nishizawa's attempt to make a better platformer after being underwhelmed by Super Mario Bros. On the Famicom. He wanted something a bit more exhilarating, initially considering a game that forced the player to stay in constant motion. Wonder Boy found its way home to Sega consoles, including both the SG-1000 and the Master System, along with a bevy of microcomputer ports thanks to Activision. Most famously, though, it was ported to the Famicom and NES by Hudson Soft, and in the process the main character was replaced by Hudson personality Takahashi Toshiyuki, an employee of Hudson Soft famous for his fast trigger finger. When the game came west, he was renamed Master Higgins, and the game renamed Adventure Island. Hudson also ported the game to the MSX computer. The Famicom port spawned a whole series of Adventure Island games spanning the NES, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy. These all resembled the gameplay of the original Wonder Boy for the most part.
Wonder Boy is only a trademark that Sega owns. My company owns all of the copyrights. Therefore, there is no problem in letting the Wonder Boy character appear in any game that Hudson releases. However, Hudson almost always changed the character. Why was that? I once politely asked the staff at Hudson, but they would not tell me. Ryuichi Nishizawa.
To make things even more confusing, when Sega ported the game to Game Gear in 1990, it came with the title The Revenge of Drancon, though it was a pretty faithful port of the original arcade game. In 1987, Wonder Boy in Monsterland hit arcades, though the only way you'd know it was a sequel to the original Wonder Boy is by the title. The caveman aesthetic had been dropped in favor of a medieval setting, and the gameplay is a slow-paced hack and slash complete with role-playing game tropes like collecting gold and buying better gear. A bizarre choice for an arcade game.
I played Wizardry every day at the office on my computer. No work was done. So here was this game that I was really into. So when starting to work on Monsterland, I wondered if it's possible to create an RPG game for the arcades. Game Center owners did not welcome this new genre. They said it's too long for 100 yen. Ryuichi Nishizawa.
The game made its way to the Master System through Sega, as well as a bunch of microcomputers again via Activision. Hudson again had its way with Westone's game, releasing it on the PC Engine, updated with characters from the mega popular Bikuriman sticker series, and retitling it Bikuriman World. Wonder Boy and Monsterland made it to the Famicom as well, ported by Nihon Aicom Daihatsu, and injected with characters from Journey to the West, retitled as Sayuki. Sayuki 2 was published on the NES by Jaleco as Wampum, with a completely new Old West theme. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Tectoy reworked the Master System version and released it as Mônica no Castelo do Dragão, featuring characters from the popular Turma da Mônica comic. This started a bit of a tradition of Wonder Boy ports featuring Monica's gang in Brazil. Which brings us to the final arcade game in the Wonder Boy trilogy, 1988's Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair, which, as I mentioned before, got an official North American release via Hudson's version on the TurboGrafx 16 CD platform. However, Wonder Boy and Monsterland was a fork in the road for the series. It was the birth of the Monster World series, and its direct sequel, Monster World 2, Dragon no Wana, was created for the Sega Master System. Except it was never released in Japan on that system, instead going to North America and Europe as Wonder Boy 3, Dragon's Trap. This is made even more confusing by the fact that there was never an official English release of Wonder Boy 2 in any of the English-speaking territories. The game did come out in Japan, though, on the PC Engine as, of all things, Adventure Island, but not related to the US Adventure Island series running on the NES. It was released on the TurboGrafx 16 as Dragon's Curse. Sega would eventually release the game in Japan itself on the Game Gear as Monster World 2, as well as in the US under Wonder Boy: The Dragon's Trap. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Dragon's Trap was the second Wonder Boy game to be rebranded with Monica's gang characters, titled Turma da Mônica Emo Resgate.
Monster World 2: The Dragon's Trap was my favorite. We had to make the game twice, for Mark III and for Game Gear, so it had a high level of perfection and the map structure was very well done. Not wishing to sound full of myself, I think this is still one of the best Metroidvania games due to the variety of main character designs, each one with different moves and stage completion strategies. It was amazing to have such a wide range of events packed into one small game. So for me, this is the textbook example for action RPGs. Ryuichi Nishizawa.
Dragon's Trap is indeed a wonderful example of an early Metroid-style game done almost perfectly, featuring a shape-shifting protagonist that kept the adventure fresh the entire way through. This was the game that would set the standard for the remainder of the Wonder Boy series. In 2017, the game saw a very faithful and absolutely gorgeous remaster for modern consoles and PCs by Parisian developer Lizard Cube and publisher .emu. The Monster World series made the leap to the Mega Drive in 1991 with the confusingly named Wonder Boy 5 Monster World 3, which was localized in English territories to Wonder Boy in Monster World. This first 16-bit outing continued down the action RPG path, but unfortunately dropped the shape-shifting mechanic of the previous game. And since the Master System was still going strong in Europe, it actually received a port of Monster World in 1993. Hudson again ported this game and again made big visual changes. This time, Monster Boy was replaced with a warrior festooned in beetle-like armor. The game was renamed the Dynastic Hero and released both in Japan and the US. Wonder Boy in Monster World was the final game in the series to receive the Turma da Mônica treatment by Tectoy, released in Brazil as Turma da Mônica na Terra dos Monstros in 1994. In 1994, Westone's final game in the series was released on the Mega Drive as Monster World 4. This time a female protagonist, Asha, takes the lead role. This is apparently why the Wonder Boy moniker was dropped. Originally the game was set to feature both male and female playable characters, but ultimately Westone went with a single hero. Nishizawa said in a previous interview that the female protagonist and new Arabian setting of Monster World 4 were because he felt that Wonder Boy in Monster World represented the culmination of everything that came before it. Monster World 4 feels like a fresh start for the series. The game was not released to English audiences until many years later, downloadable on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Wii in the late 2000s. Unfortunately, Westone Bit Entertainment went bankrupt in 2014. The rights for the original game wound up in the hands of a Korean developer called CFK, who brought us Wonder Boy Returns in 2016 for Steam and, eventually, for PlayStation 4 and the Switch. Wonder Boy Returns starts out looking like a loving homage to Westone's original game, but quickly settles in for 40 boring levels of lackluster graphics and poor controls. It was a sad addition to an otherwise great series. But this was not the final Monster World game. Along with the Dragon's Trap remake by Lizard Cube, fellow Parisian developer Game Atelier released Monster Boy in the Cursed Kingdom across multiple consoles in late 2018. Like the Dragon's Trap remake, this was done with the involvement of Yuichi Nishizawa and feels like nothing but one big love letter to the entire series, and a pretty fantastic Metroid-style adventure to boot. It's great to see that this long and storied, and very prolific, Sega franchise appears to be alive and well more than 30 years after the lovable little caveman pranced his way across his first arcade screen. Wonder Boy 3 Monster Lair may not be the best in the series, but it brings a style all its own to the franchise and to the shooter genre. And that'll do it for this episode of Generation 16. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe. Join me next time when we head into the home stretch of 1990 with a classic Telenet shooter. See you then.